die. Go too fast. I'm taking 3.
I'm going for the St. Louis now.
Oh no!
Son of a bitch.
You get your 2?
Yeah. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Thotgor here, and today we're going to take a look at part 2 of my German naval review. As discussed in last video, today I'm taking a look at the Admiral Hipper Class heavy cruiser. I'm taking a look at the Scharnhorst Class battle cruiser or battleship. We'll discuss that later on. And finally, the Z-23 class destroyers, also known as the Narvik class. So today's video is going to be most likely a little longer than the last German Navy video, and that's mainly because the ships I'm reviewing today saw active service during World War II, and I have a lot more to talk about with regards to specific battles they fought in with the H-class battleships and even the Graf Zeppelin. Even though they actually did build the Graf Zeppelin, they didn't actually participate in battle, so it was a struggle to find interesting things to talk about, I guess, rather than just throwing random facts out there at you. So we'll start off today, as discussed, with the Admiral Hipper Class heavy cruiser. So this class of ship consisted of 5 cruisers. There was the Admiral Hipper, the Blucher, the Prinz Eugen, the Seydlitz, and the Lützow. So my pronunciations are going to be pretty bad for the names of these German ships, so I apologize in advance, doing my best. But as always, feel free to comment on how terrible my pronunciations are. Now, of the 5 heavy cruisers that were ordered, only the Admiral Hipper, Blucher, Prinz Eugen were completed and saw service. Now, the Lützow did see service, but was never fully complete. It was about 95% complete, and the Seydlitz was never complete as a cruiser itself, and actually that ship was converted, or attempted to be converted, into an aircraft carrier later on in the war. And that actually took place, yeah, so Seydlitz was converted to an aircraft carrier, but work was never completed, and Lützow was actually sold to the Red Navy in 1940. So interesting plot twist there by Germany, I suppose. Now, Admiral Hipper and the Blucher both took part in Operation Wesenbung. This was the invasion of Norway. This took place in April 1940, and it also included the invasion of Denmark. The occupation of Denmark itself was largely a ground offensive, but to take Norway, the Kriegsmarine had to invade from the sea. They knew this, and so they were planning for this. Now, the Germans were convinced that the Allies were going to take Norway themselves and end Norwegian neutrality. So the Germans began preliminary planning in December of 1939 to take Norway and preserve neutrality, as the Germans put it. So between January 14th and January 19th, the Kriegsmarine expanded the plan, infantry divisions were readied, U-boats almost completely stopped raiding in the Atlantic in order to support the invasion, and paratroop divisions were training to take airfields within Denmark and Norway. The Germans planned on using their fast capital ships and screens to support the invasion, but also to carry and land the troops. It was decided this could allow the ground forces to invade Denmark and Norway at the same time, thus preserving the element of surprise. Rather than leaving it to the slow merchant ships and potentially losing their element of surprise, it was favored to use the fast capital ships and the supporting screens to not only support the invasion, but to land the troops to take the ground. Now, Admiral Hipper's battle group consisted of herself, the Admiral Hipper, 4 destroyers, and on board these 5 ships there were 1,700 troops to take Trondheim. This is a city within Norway. The Blucher battle group itself was consisted of herself, the Blucher, the incomplete Lützow, the light cruiser Emden, 3 torpedo boats, 8 minesweepers, and 2,000 troops on board to take Oslo. The assault on Trondheim and the battle history behind it itself. So here we're going to be looking at Admiral Hipper. So Admiral Hipper led the charge. While steaming towards her objective, the Admiral Hipper's battle group spotted the British destroyer HMS Glowworm. A short battle did ensue and the Glowworm was sunk. Admiral Hipper's battle group reached Trondheim and successfully landed troops and took their objective. In December 1940, the Admiral Hipper broke out into the Atlantic to raid merchant shipping, ending without any great success in early 1941. In February of 1941, Admiral Hipper again broke into the Atlantic, but this time was able to sink several merchant ships before returning to Germany later in 1941. The last action that Admiral Hipper saw was during the Battle of the Barents Sea, or the Barents Sea, on December 31st, 1942. The Allied convoy JW-51B, consisted of 14 merchant ships protected by 6 Royal Navy destroyers, 2 Royal Navy corvettes, 1 Royal Navy minesweeper, and 2 trawlers. The German forces were the Admiral Hipper and the Lutzow, supported by 6 destroyers. On December 30th, 1942, U-354 sighted convoy JW-51B, and the German forces were ordered to engage. The Germans split into 2 groups, being led by Admiral Hipper and Lutzow respectively. The battle took place during a polar night, which lasted a month, so keep in mind that this is taking place near the Arctic Circle, right? Because this convoy is heading into Russia, trying to land into Murmansk. So you're way up there in the Arctic region, and up there, you know, you can have months at a time without any sunlight. So that's what they're experiencing here right now. Now, neither side could really tell who was shooting at what, and so confusion did take hold. Both battle groups, Admiral Hipper and the Lutzow, engaged the British forces, and at the end of the battle, both battle groups disengaged out of fear of torpedo attack. The Germans did have orders not to risk their ships, and as a result, the Royal Navy knew that they were heavily outgunned and that their biggest or most powerful weapon in their arsenal was torpedoes. Now, at the end of the battle, the Royal Navy did lose 1 destroyer, 1 minesweeper, and 1 destroyer was damaged, and 250 sailors were killed. While the German forces suffered 1 destroyer sunk, 1 cruiser damaged, the Admiral Hipper, and 333 killed. This was the last action that the Admiral Hipper saw. As for the remainder of the war, she underwent repairs until finally the war ended. Now to take a look at the Blucher. So the Blucher served as a flagship for her battle group to take Oslo. So we're going back to the invasion of Norway here with Blucher. So on the night of April 8th, the battle group entered the Oslo ford. 3 coastal guns from Norway engaged the battle group at very close range, while torpedo launchers mounted on land took aim at the Blucher. After taking several hits from coastal guns and from torpedoes, a major fire broke out and got into the magazines. The magazines exploded, Blucher capsized and sank with major loss of life. The wreck still sits at the bottom of the Oslo ford today, actually. Now, the last ship of the Admiral Hipper class that I wanted to talk about was the Prince Eugen. This is probably the most famous ship of the Admiral Hipper class, and it's because of her actions that she played with the Bismarck, most likely. So, Prince Eugen saw extensive service in World War II, but was most noted for her role in breaking into the Atlantic with the Bismarck. After the sinking of the Hood, Prince Eugen broke away from the Bismarck to continue raiding merchant shipping in the Atlantic. Keeping in mind at this point Bismarck is damaged and Royal Navy's hunting her down, Prince Eugen splits off and continues with the mission to raid merchant shipping in the Atlantic. This was cut short though due to engine troubles. Prince Eugen then headed to occupied France for repairs. Now repairs were completed, and the need to bring German ships back to ports in Germany led the Prince Eugen and the Gneisenau to make that famous daylight run through the English Channel, We're going to talk more about that run when I get to the Guys Now itself, but that was really a good action there by the Kriegsmarine. Now, in February 1942, Prince Eugen was assigned to Norway to intercept Allied convoys and to destroy them. This was cut short again, however, when Prince Eugen was hit by a torpedo from the Royal Navy submarine Trident, severely damaging her stern, which ultimately needed to be repaired back in Germany. Once returning to service, Prince Eugen served as a training ship for new cadets and officers in the Baltic Sea. With the war not going so well for Germany, Prince Eugen was then used as artillery support for retreating German forces. After the war, actually, Prince Eugen was transferred to the U.S. Navy as a war prize. Ultimately, Prince Eugen was used for testing in Operations Crossroad. This was the nuclear test in the Bikini Atoll. Prince Eugen actually did survive both tests, so there were two nukes that were set off in that time, and Prince Eugen survived both. She was towed to the, now again pronunciation here, Kwajalein Atoll. So I'm going to spell that Kwajalein. So however you pronounce that, atoll. Unfortunately, Prince Eugen did capsize and sink in December 1946. Today, however, the wreck is still visible, and parts of the wreck are still above the waterline. So that's why I spelt out the atoll, in case anyone wanted to take a trip to see the Prince Eugen. It's still there today, and it's still possible to take a look at her. Overall, the ships of the class did vary slightly in size, from about 195 meters to about 213 meters long. Displacement for the ships was between 18,200 tons and 20,100 tons. The hull itself had 14 watertight compartments and a double bottom that extended 72% of her keel. During wartime, the ships had a crew of 51 officers and 1,548 sailors. The engines themselves are rated at 132,000 shaft horsepower for a speed of 32 knots. At a cruising speed of 20 knots, the ships had a range of about 6,800 nautical miles. The ships were armed with 8-inch guns mounted in 4 twin turrets. The guns could reach out to a range of 33,540 meters. The ships had heavy AA armament, with 12 4.1-inch SKC-33 guns in twin mountings. This served as a long-range AA for the Admiral Hipper Class. Now, into close range, these figures are based on the later war variants. Obviously, as you know, in World of Ships, you get different hull models. This would be the last hull that we would see on an Admiral Hipper. So close range AA was 20 4-centimeter guns, 18 2-centimeter guns. The ships also had 12 torpedo tubes with a maximum distance of 14,000 meters. The ships also carried 96 mines. The main armor belt was 80 millimeters thick. The main batteries, however, did have 105 millimeter thick faces, 70 millimeter thick sides, and 70 millimeters on top. Now, in terms of where we would see this cruiser in the tech tree in World Warships, again, not 100% sure. But I would put them into the later tiers, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. Anywhere in between there. I know that's quite a range, but I would put them up there. Obviously, they're not early cruisers, so they're not going to appear tier 5 or below. They are later cruisers. Now, they were constructed in the early 30s, and based on some other ships here in the game that we know of that were constructed around the same time, most of those do fall into the tier 6 to 10 range. So that's where I would expect to see the Admiral Hipper. Which variant of the Admiral Hipper, because the Admiral Hipper, the Blucher, and the Prince Eugen did vary slightly in size and armament, especially when we're looking at AA armament. So which one of those ships would appear as the actual ship of the class, I do suspect that we're going to see one of these ships appear as a premium, maybe the Prince Eugen, because it's the most famous. So that's the Admiral Hipper class that we're taking a look at. Now we're going to move into the Scharnhorst Class battlecruiser. I'm going to say battlecruiser for now, but we will discuss it in further detail, obviously. So the Scharnhorst class was the lead ship of her class. It consisted of two ships, herself, the Scharnhorst, and the ship, battlecruiser Geisnau. So it's called a battlecruiser or a battleship. So I'm going to be calling it a battlecruiser, and I'm doing this for two reasons. One is the lighter armor belts on these two ships than the normal battleships of their time, say for example Bismarck and Tirpitz. The second reason is the lighter guns of the ship. Because they were only at 11 inches, the normal German ships at the time were using 14, all were planned to be increased to 15 inches. Now, because of these two reasons, obviously the ships would have been lighter and faster than a battleship, therefore leading to the battlecruiser. Battlecruiser being a ship that has generally the same armament as a battleship, but has lighter armor, providing for faster speeds, making it more flexible on the battlefield. Now, as discussed, the Scharnhorst class did consist of two ships, Scharnhorst and Geisnau. For this part of the video, I'm going to be speaking specifically about the Scharnhorst, because typically the Geisnau was always right next to the Scharnhorst. Completed in January 1939 with a main battery of 9 11-inch guns mounted in 3 triple turrets. There were plans to replace these with 15-inch guns, however this never happened. So both Scharnhorst and Geisnau operated together during the first part of World War II. On their first operation, Scharnhorst sank the auxiliary cruiser HMS, the pronunciation of this is going to be bad, so Rawalpindi? Rawalpindi. So the auxiliary cruiser HMS, that name. Now, during Operation Wesenbung, now this was the invasion of Norway, which we spoke about earlier when talking about Admiral Hipper Class. So both the Scharnhorst and Geisnau engaged the HMS Renown, which was a battlecruiser, sank the HMS Glorious, a carrier, and sank 2 destroyers, the HMS Acasta and HMS Ardent. It was during this engagement that Scharnhorst achieved one of the longest naval gunfire hits in recorded history at 24,100 meters. This was a hit scored on the HMS Glorious. Before sinking the Royal Navy destroyers, HMS Acasta managed to hit the Scharnhorst with a torpedo, which did cause serious damage to the Scharnhorst. The torpedo tore a hole 14 meters by 16 meters into the Scharnhorst, causing the rear turret to be disabled and the loss of 48 men. 2,500 tons of water did seep into the ship, and this caused a 5-degree list, reducing the Scharnhorst's top speed to 20 knots. Now in June 1940, Scharnhorst returned to Germany for repairs, and this lasted for some 6 months. So by January 22nd, 1941, Scharnhorst was repaired and back with her sister ship, the Geisnau. Both were to take part in Operation Berlin. Now this was the planned raid into the Atlantic to disrupt Allied shipping. By February 3rd of 1941, both ships managed to avoid the British home fleet and were now in the open Atlantic. The commanding German admiral, Admiral Günther Lütjens, had orders not to engage with Allied capital ships, and as a result, when the pair spotted various Allied convoys escorted by battleships of the Allies, neither ship would engage. Instead, they would call upon the U-boats that were in the area and then help coordinate the U-boat attack on the convoy. On March 15th, Scharnhorst and her sister ship spotted a dispersed convoy in the middle of the Atlantic. Scharnhorst managed to sink two ships, and several days later the main body of the Allied convoy was discovered, and Scharnhorst got another 7 ships. Total tonnage sunk by the Scharnhorst at this time was 27,277 tons. One of the Allied ships, however, did manage to send out an SOS, which was picked up by the Royal Navy, and they then sent HMS Rodney and King George V. So Scharnhorst and Gneisenau used their speed to get away, and just by luck there was also a squall that they were able to get themselves into, making the British break contact and unable to pursue the two ships any further. Now, intervention by the large British ships did convince Lütjens that any further success in raiding these convoys was unlikely. And during the operation, Scharnhorst did have problems with some of her superheating tubes in her boilers, which did need repair. Course was set then for Brest in France, where both ships arrived on March 22nd, 1941. Work was completed in July of 1941, but this was too late to allow the ships to sail with Prince Eugen and the Bismarck during Operation Rheinbung. The British attempt, the Bismarck's attempt at breaking out into the Atlantic there, where Bismarck famously sunk the hood, and Prince Eugen broke away, as we talked earlier about the Admiral Hipper Class. So with Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and now Prince Eugen, all safely in France, German Naval Command and Hitler wanted the return of these capital ships to German ports. This was because they wanted these ships to be able to take part in Arctic raiding of the Allied convoys on their way to Russia. So the plan called for a daring daylight run up the English Channel so they could return to the German ports. At 2300 hours on February 11th, 1943, the three capital ships set out on their mission. They entered the channel at 27 knots, hugging the French coast. The British didn't know the ships left port, as the sub who was watching them did have to disengage in order to recharge her batteries. By 0630 hours, the group were now passing Cherbourg, where they were met by a flotilla of torpedo boats. Adolf Galland directed the Luftwaffe in covering the force, and by 1300 hours that day the fleet cleared the Strait of Dover, when at 1330 hours a flight of Swordfish torpedo bombers escorted by Spitfires finally showed up to challenge them. The RAF, however, couldn't break through and lost all 6 torpedo planes. Through the hail of British bomber attacks, Scharnhorst and her fleet did make it into German ports for repair. The air attacks were so intense that some of Scharnhorst's 20mm flak guns had cracks down their barrels from continuously firing. Once repairs were finally completed in August of 1942, Scharnhorst set off to the Arctic Task Force to meet with the Tirpitz and 5 destroyers to work with, in conjunction with U-boats, in sinking any Allied shipping that was headed for Russia. On September 22, 1942, a pair of X-craft mini-submarines seriously damaged the Tirpitz. This left only Scharnhorst and her 5 escorting destroyers to stop the Allied shipping into Russia. On December 26, 1943, Scharnhorst and her destroyers were ordered to intercept a convoy called JW-55B. Unknown to the Germans was the fact that the Allies could now read German naval codes, and as a result, the British prepared for the assault. The British forces consisted of 3 cruisers, HMS HMS Belfast, and HMS Sheffield. These were commanded by Admiral Burnett, and the battleship HMS Duke of York, 1 cruiser and 4 destroyers, which were commanded by Admiral Fraser. At 0840 hours, Belfast picked up the Scharnhorst on her radar, and by 0921 hours, Belfast's lookout could now see the Scharnhorst. The Scharnhorst didn't know she was detected, as her radar was shut off out of fear that the British would pick it up, and at 0924 hours, the British opened fire, landing 2 hits. The first hit only caused minor damage, but the second hit landed and destroyed the forward rangefinders and destroyed the radar tower on the Scharnhorst. At 13:15 hours, Scharnhorst lost contact with convoy JW-55B, and the commanding officer of the German forces ordered the destroyers back to port. Meanwhile, Admiral Fraser and the Duke of York made radar contact with the Scharnhorst, and at 16:17 hours, HMS Duke of York was moving into position to begin firing on the Scharnhorst. At 16:50 hours, the Duke of York opened fire, and the two ships began to exchange salvos for some time, each taking some damage. At 18:42 hours, Duke of York ceased firing, after firing 52 salvos and landing at least 13 hits. Scharnhorst was still getting away, however her secondary armament was almost totally destroyed. Admiral Fraser, seeing this, ordered his destroyers in for a torpedo run. After taking 4 torpedo hits from destroyers and several more from HMS Belfast and HMS Jamaica, both cruisers, only one of the Scharnhorst turrets could still fire. Scharnhorst did eventually start to list to starboard, and at 19:45 hours the ship sank by the bows. Of a crew of 1,968 officers and men, only 36 men survived. This, of course, took place on December 26, 1943. Scharnhorst herself was 234 meters long, she had a beam of 30 meters, and she had 3 Brown and Boveri and Company geared steam turbines, which produced 159,551 horsepower. This gave the Scharnhorst a top speed of 31 knots and a range of 7,100 nautical miles when cruising at a speed of 19 knots. As mentioned earlier, she did have a battery of 9 11-inch guns mounted in 3 triple turrets. Again, they did want to install 15-inch guns later on in Scharnhorst, however this never happened. Secondary armament on Scharnhorst was 12 5.9-inch L-55 guns, 14 10.5 centimeter L-65s, 16 1.5-inch L-83, and 38 2-centimeter guns. Scharnhorst also carried 6 21-inch above-water torpedo tubes. In terms of the armor belt, Scharnhorst had 350 millimeter thick belt armor, 50 millimeter thick deck armor, and the turrets had between 200 millimeters and 360 millimeters of protection. So where are we going to see the Scharnhorst in the tech tree in World of Warships? Something I've been asking myself, and right now within World of Warships, this ship class will be called a battleship. There are battleships right now in the game that are called battleships, but were actually battle cruisers. These are the Congo, the Amagi, two glaring examples of battle cruisers being in the battleship line, because at this time Wargaming hasn't expanded that line at all. So given that information, and given that these ships will be coming out, or the line at least is going to be coming out probably in October for us, I would expect to see the Scharnhorst class appear as a battleship. I would expect to see it in the Tier 6 or the Tier 7 position. We know that Bismarck and Tirpitz will hold the Tier 8 position. The Scharnhorst definitely is not an improvement upon the Bismarck, so it's not going to be Tier 8 or Tier 9 or 10. That'll probably be the H-class battleships that we discussed in my first video. So I would see Scharnhorst sitting at Tier 6, maybe Tier 7. I think that sounds reasonable. So we've looked at Scharnhorst now. Now we're going to move into our last ship for the review, and we're going to go into the destroyer. So the destroyer I'm going to look at is called the Type 36A class destroyer. With the German destroyers, all of them are known by the hull number. Now, to help the Allies distinguish between this, the Allies knew this type, or this class destroyer, the 1936A class destroyer, as the Narvik Class destroyer. The Narvik Class destroyer hull numbers ranged from Z-23, which is the ship we're talking about specifically, to Z-39. Now, I was doing my research on these destroyers. There's not a whole lot to talk about with regards to these destroyers, so this part will be a little shorter for us to finish up here, just in case you were wondering. Now, in terms of armament on the destroyers themselves, they were actually closer to a light cruiser than a destroyer, given their use of 5.9-inch guns as their main armament. Typical destroyers of the time had either 4.7 inch to 5 inch guns, so higher caliber guns on these German destroyers. The destroyers themselves initially were intended to carry 2 forward-mounted guns in a twin turret. However, these turrets were not ready for the early models, leaving them with only 1 forward-mounted gun. The class also had problems with their steam engines and suffered in high seas due to the weight of the forward gun on the bow. There were 8 ships of the class which were made from 1938 to 1940. These 8 ships were dubbed destroyers 1936A class. And then there were 7 destroyers numbered Z31 to Z39 which were called the 1936A MOB models. So these later models featured better engines and better sea performance when compared to the early Z23 to Z29 models. Now getting back to Z23 specifically, so Z23 was about 127 meters long, it had a beam of 12 meters, it had a displacement of 3,605 tons, and the engines could produce 69,000 horsepower, which gave the Z23 a top speed of 36 knots. She had a range of 2,500 nautical miles when cruising at a speed of 19 knots. She had a crew of 11 officers and 321 sailors. Now she did have 4 15-centimeter TBTS K C/36 guns, which were mounted in single turrets, and they were all aft. Now, after the upgrades on the twin turret design, the Z23s were then also fitted with 1 twin gun mount on the bow. So that's a total of 6 guns. You've got the 1 twin mount gun on the bow, and then throughout the remainder of the ship, you've got additional single-inch guns, and there's a total of 4. AA was 4 3.7 centimeter SKC-30 guns in twin mounts. She had 5 2 centimeter guns with single mounts. She also mounted 8 torpedo tubes, which were 21 inches, and they were mounted in 2 power torpedo mounts, so 2 power torpedo mounts that would shoot 4 torpedoes each. Now in terms of depth charges, I know in World of Warships there are no submarines and the depth charges on the ships are purely for aesthetic reasons, but I'm still going to talk about them briefly here as well. So the Z23 had 4 depth charge mounts on the sides and rear, and also had 6 depth charge racks for individual fire. Z23 could launch 2 or 4 patterns of charges with 16 charges in each. Now ultimately Z23 was scuttled on August 21st, 1944. This was after being bombed by an Allied air attack. If you do some research on some of these German destroyers, you'll note that some of them were actually handed over to the Allies at the end of the war as war prizes, and some of them did serve with countries around the world up until the 1950s. I didn't want to get too far into that. The video, we're past the 30-minute mark now on our video here, so I wanted to wrap it up there, just briefly touching on that German destroyer Z23. In terms of where we would see Z23 in the tech tree in World of Warships, again, I had to think about it. I think I would see this ship maybe Tier 5 or Tier 6. I know she was, launched later on than some of the other destroyers at Tier 5. And what that sort of leads me to believe that she might be at Tier 6. So, I mean, you can tell. I'm not sure where she's going to show up in our tech tree here, but I would hazard a guess at 5 or 6. There were later destroyers that the Germans had, and those are the destroyers I would expect to see in the higher tiers. So maybe 5 or 6 is where we're going to see the Z23. So this is going to conclude part 2 of my look at the German Navy and some of the ships we might expect to see in the tech tree when it is released in October of this year. Fingers crossed anyway that that time frame is maintained. I thank you guys so much for sticking around, watching the video. Of course, if you have any questions or comments or any mistakes you might have noticed and you want to throw out the correction, don't be afraid to leave a comment. Tell some friends about the channel here. I'm always looking to expand. And, as always, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. and we'll catch you guys tomorrow in the next video.